The jolt didn't just stop the elevator, it felt like it stopped my heart. For a second, the world was a vacuum of silence, and then the emergency red light flickered on, casting a bloody, dramatic glow over the man standing 3 feet away from me. "Well?" Eric's voice rumbled, smooth as a century-old scotch and twice as intoxicating. "I've had many fantasies involving elevators, but being stuck in one with a delivery girl carrying a box of artisanal organic kale wasn't high on the list. Usually there's more champagne and fewer clipboards." I squeezed the handle of my delivery crate, my knuckles turning a ghostly white. "It's a concierge delivery, Mr. And if you'd checked your schedule, you'd know your nutritionist insisted on the kale. Also, I'm pretty sure the delivery girl has a name." "Do you?" He tilted his head, his dark eyes tracking the movement of my throat as I swallowed. "You've been coming to this building for 6 months, and yet, every time I ask for a name, you give me a different flower. Last week you were rose. The week before, peony. You're running out of spring perennials, Daisy." "It's Petra," I snapped, then immediately bit my tongue. Rule number 1 of being a ghost: don't give the haunting a name. He hummed, a low, vibrating sound that I felt in my marrow. "Petra, strong, sharp. It suits the way you glare at my tie." I didn't glare. I focused. I reached for the emergency panel, my fingers dancing over the buttons. Nothing. Not even a hum. "The primary power grid is down," I muttered, more to myself than him. The backup should have kicked in by now. "It's a city-wide blackout if the lack of street noise is any indication," Eric said, sounding far too calm for a man trapped in a metal cage. He leaned back against the mirrored wall, crossing his expensive leather-clad boots. "Which means the building's heavy-duty air filtration system is currently as dead as your kale." My blood turned to ice. My hand flew to the small, discreet patch hidden behind my left ear, the chemical scent masker that kept my honey and wildfire essence locked under a layer of boring, human-grade lily of the valley. The patch was electric. It required a microcurrent to stay active, a microcurrent that was currently failing because the elevator's localized dampening field had died with the power. I could feel it, a slow, warm tingle spreading down my neck. The lily was evaporating and the wildfire was waking up. "You look pale, Petra," Eric remarked, stepping closer. The space was already small, but with him moving, it felt microscopic. "Are you claustrophobic? Or is it just the company?" "I'm fine," I lied, my voice an octave higher than usual. I have a thing about stagnant air." "Stagnant?" He took a deep, deliberate breath, his nostrils flaring. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, that devastating, arrogant smirk that made me want to either slap him or kiss him until he forgot his own zip code. "I wouldn't call it stagnant. In fact, the air in here is starting to get very interesting." I pressed my back against the opposite wall, praying the darkness would hide the flush creeping up my cheeks. "It's the kale. It's very pungent." "It doesn't smell like kale, Petra." He took another step, his chest nearly brushing my shoulders. He didn't reach for me. He didn't have to. The heat radiating off him was an invitation and a command all at once. He leaned down, his lips hovering just an inch from the sensitive skin of my ear, right where the masking patch was beginning to peel away. "It smells like a girl I met 3 years ago," he whispered, his voice dropping into a growl that was pure, unadulterated alpha. "A girl who thought she could hide from a wolf by wearing a flower's skin." The patch gave a final, pathetic hiss and fell off, fluttering to the floor like a dead butterfly. My true scent exploded into the small space, thick and sweet and undeniable. Eric's eyes went dark, the amber of his wolf swirling to the surface. "Found you!" I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "If you think this means I'm coming home to be your trophy mate, you're going to need a lot more than a blackout and a broken elevator." He chuckled, a dark, hungry sound. "Oh, I don't want a trophy, Petra. I want a challenge, and I think we have 64 floors of challenge ahead of us." The elevator gave a violent groan and suddenly dropped 3 feet, throwing me directly into his arms. Chapter 2. Falling into Eric's arms felt less like an accident and more like a tactical error on behalf of gravity. 1 second I was standing on my own 2 feet, a fiercely independent woman with a plan. The next, I was a tangle of limbs pressed against a custom-tailored suit that cost more than my entire apartment. He caught me with a grunt of surprised satisfaction, his hands locking around my waist with the kind of strength that reminded me exactly why I'd spent 3 years running from his kind. "Comfortable?" he murmured, his breath fanning against my temple. The elevator swayed slightly, groaning as if it were considering another 3-foot drop just for the fun of it. "I've had more spacious dental appointments," I snapped, trying to push off his chest. It was like trying to move a marble statue that happened to be radiating 102 degrees of body heat. "Let me go, Eric. The cable stabilized." "The cable stabilized, but the hatch is 10 feet up," he noted, his voice humming with that insufferable alpha calm. He didn't let go. Instead, his grip tightened just enough to be possessive without being restrictive. "And unless you've developed the ability to levitate along with your talent for chemical warfare, you're going to need a lift." I looked up. The emergency hatch was indeed a mocking square of darkness far above my head. I looked back at the crate of organic kale, now upside down on the floor. "My delivery is ruined. My boss is going to kill me if the lack of magnesium doesn't kill you first. I'll buy the company and give you a promotion if it gets you to stop talking about vegetables while I'm trying to save your life," Eric said, a flash of genuine humor dancing in his amber eyes. He stepped back, keeping one hand on my arm as he surveyed the space. "Here's the deal, Petra. I'm going to boost you up. You open the latch, climb through, and then you reach down to help me." "Help you?" I arched an eyebrow, my sass returning as my adrenaline leveled out. "You're an alpha. Don't you just growl at the ceiling until it obeys you?" "Hilarious. Truly. I'll make sure to put comedian on your tombstone if we fall," he retorted. He crouched down, interlacing his fingers to create a step. "Now, move, before the air in here becomes 80% your scent and 20% my lack of patience." I didn't argue. Mostly because he was right. The scent of honey and wildfire was becoming so thick it was making my own head spin. I placed my boot in his hands, feeling the raw power in his shoulders as he hoisted me up with effortless ease. I scrambled through the hatch, the grit of the elevator shaft coating my palms, and pulled myself onto the dusty roof of the car. The shaft was a cavern of shadows, lit only by the faint red glow from below. I leaned back into the opening, looking down at him. He was standing there, looking up, the red light catching the sharp angles of his jaw. He looked like a devil in a 3-piece suit. "You okay up there, Ghost?" he called out. "I'm fine. It's just a long way up," I whispered. I reached my hand down, my fingers stretching toward his. "Come on, grab hold." He jumped, catching the edge of the hatch and my forearm in one fluid motion. For a second we were suspended, the weight of him pulling at my muscles, the intimacy of the contact sending electric shocks through my system. I hauled him up with a strength I didn't know I had, and he rolled onto the roof beside me, breathing hard. We were inches apart in the dark, the silence of the dead building pressing in on us. "You're stronger than you look," he panted, his hand still anchored around my wrist. "I've spent 3 years carrying the weight of my own secrets, Eric. 190 pounds of arrogant alpha is nothing." He laughed then, a rich, genuine sound that echoed up the shaft. 185. Let's not exaggerate. Now, look up. There's a maintenance door on the 64th floor. We just have to climb the ladder." "The 64th floor? That's your penthouse," I realized, my heart hammering. No way. I'll wait here for the fire department." "The fire department is currently busy with a citywide blackout, Petra, and I have the only key to that door." He leaned in closer, his eyes locked on mine. "Besides, I think it's time we finish the conversation we started 3 years ago. In private." He began to climb, and with no other choice, I followed. Every rung of the ladder brought us closer to his world. When we finally reached the door, he punched a code into a battery-operated keypad. The door hissed open, revealing a darkened expanse of marble and glass. We stepped into the penthouse, the silence even deeper here. I turned to tell him I was leaving the moment the power came back, but the words died in my throat. The heavy security door behind us clicked shut with a sound of absolute finality. Eric turned toward me, his silhouette framed by the lightning of the approaching storm outside. The door is voice-coded and deadbolted on a separate circuit, Petra. And since the power is out... You're telling me we're locked in? I said, my voice trembling with a mix of fury and something else I refused to name. I'm telling you, he whispered, stepping into my personal space, that for the first time in 3 years, nobody is going to interrupt us. Chapter 3. The luxury of Eric's penthouse was offensive. Even in the dark, the scent of expensive leather, cold marble, and whatever wood-paneled success smelled like was overwhelming. It was a palace designed for a man who never heard the word no. And here I was, trapped in it, wearing a concierge uniform and smelling like the very thing I'd tried to kill, his mate. Make yourself at home, Eric said, his voice trailing off as he moved through the shadows with the practiced ease of a wolf in his own den. I'd offer to take your coat, but I suspect you're still vibrating with the urge to stab me with a salad fork. The kale survived the fall better than my patience, I muttered, dropping my ruined delivery crate on a table that probably cost more than my college tuition. How long until the backup generators kick in? In a citywide surge this big? Could be an hour, could be until morning. A match flared, the tiny flame illuminating his face as he lit a series of thick black candles. It seems fate wants us to have a candlelit dinner, Petra. Or at least a candlelit interrogation. I'm not answering anything, I said, crossing my arms and leaning against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, the city was a graveyard of black glass, the only light coming from the occasional flash of lightning. I moved on. I have a life. I have a cat. A cat? Really? Eric walked toward me, holding a candle. The flickering light made the amber in his eyes dance. Is that what you transitioned to after leaving the most powerful pack in the Northeast? Feline companionship and synthetic lilies? It's a very discerning cat, I snapped. And I didn't leave a pack. I escaped a cage. There's a difference. I never put you in a cage, he said softly, stopping just a foot away. The heat from the candle was nothing compared to the heat of his gaze. You were the one who ran before I could even offer you the key. You wouldn't have offered a key, Eric. You're an alpha. You offer collars. You offer protection that feels a lot like house arrest. I wanted to see if I could exist without being a footnote in your biography. He set the candle down on a nearby ledge and stepped into my space, his presence an invisible weight. And? Did you? Exist? I was doing great until tonight. I lied, my voice cracking just enough to betray me. You were hiding, he corrected. He reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from my cheek. Not quite touching, but close enough that I could feel the static. You were a ghost, Petra. I could see it in the way you walked into my lobby every week. You looked like you were waiting for the world to end so you could finally stop pretending. I let out a sharp, jagged laugh. You're a billionaire, not a psychologist. Don't try to read me. I don't have to read you, I can smell you. He leaned down, his nose grazing the sensitive skin of my neck, right where the mask had failed. I gasped, my back hitting the cold glass of the window. You smell like panic and defiance, and underneath that, you smell like you've missed me just as much as I've missed the hunt. I don't miss being hunted, I whispered, though my body was traitorously leaning into him. Then let's stop the hunt, he murmured. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eye, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. Stay the night, not as a prisoner, not as a mate, just as Petra. Let's see if we can talk without you trying to jump out of a moving vehicle. And if I say no? Then you can sit in that very expensive armchair and glare at me in the dark until the sun comes up. I'm a patient man, Petra. I waited 3 years. I can wait 6 hours. He turned to walk toward the kitchen, his silhouette confident and relaxed. I watched him, my mind racing. I should be looking for a way out. I should be checking the vents. But as a massive crack of thunder shook the penthouse, I found myself moving toward the candlelight instead of the door. Eric? I called out. He stopped, turning back. Yes? If we're doing this, I want the good scotch, none of that guest stuff. A slow, triumphant grin spread across his face. I thought you'd never ask. He poured 2 glasses, the amber liquid catching the light. As he handed me mine, our fingers brushed, a deliberate, lingering contact. But just as I took a sip, a low, rhythmic thumping sound began to echo from the front door. Not a knock. A heavy, mechanical beat. Eric's smile vanished instantly. He set his glass down, his posture shifting into something lethal. Eric, what is that? I asked, my fierce exterior flickering with genuine alarm. The secondary security override, he whispered, his eyes fixed on the door. Someone isn't waiting for the power to come back, and they aren't using a key. The heavy steel door didn't just open. It groaned as if being pulled from its hinges by something with the strength of a freight train. Chapter 4. The sound of the secondary override wasn't a mechanical failure. It was the sound of a very expensive, very illegal hydraulic spreader. The steel door groaned, its frame shrieking as the locks were forced by sheer, cold pressure. I set my scotch down so hard the liquid sloshed onto my hand. Eric? I whispered, my voice sharp. I thought you said this place was a fortress. It is, Eric replied, his voice dropping into a register that made the hair on my arms stand up. He didn't look scared. He looked offended. He moved in front of me, his shadow swallowing mine. But every fortress has a back door, and apparently someone just found the crowbar. The door didn't fly open. It was pushed inward with agonizing slowness, revealing a figure silhouetted by the dim emergency lights of the hallway. It wasn't a hit squad. It wasn't a rival pack. It was a man in a rumpled suit, holding a tablet and a very large, very heavy-duty industrial jack. Mr. Ah? The man panted, wiping sweat from his forehead. Thank God. The elevators are out, the stairs are jammed with panicked interns, and your mother told me if I didn't get this quarterly merger update to you before the midnight deadline, she'd have my head mounted in the lobby. Eric's entire body deflated, the lethal alpha tension vanishing in a puff of pure, unadulterated annoyance. Marcus, you broke into my penthouse with a hydraulic jack to deliver paperwork? It's the Sterling Holt merger, sir. The cooling period ends at 12. Marcus looked past Eric, his eyes widening as he spotted me. Oh, I didn't realize you were in a meeting. With a concierge? I'm leaving, I said, seizing the opportunity. I grabbed my empty kale crate. Marcus, you're a godsend. Move that jack, I'm headed for the stairs. The stairs are locked from the outside for security, miss, Marcus said, looking apologetic. I had to use the service vent from the 63rd floor to even get into this corridor. You're stuck here until the main power reset at 4:00 a.m. I turned back to Eric, who was now looking at Marcus with a murderous glint in his eye. You have a very dedicated assistant, Eric. I'd fire him, but I suspect he's the only thing standing between you and your mother's interior decorating choices. Marcus, Eric said, his voice dangerously low. Go to the guest suite. Sit in the dark. Do not speak. Do not breathe loudly. I will deal with your dedication in the morning. But the mergers... Go. Marcus vanished into the darkness of the hallway faster than a wolf on a scent trail. The silence that followed was heavier than before, punctuated only by the distant rumble of thunder. Eric turned back to me, the candlelight catching the wry, frustrated twist of his lips. So, he said, stepping closer until I could smell the scotch on his breath and the heat of his skin. Where were we? I believe you were about to tell me why you really ran, and I was about to convince you that I'm not the monster your memory made me out to be. I ran because you're a vacuum, Eric, I said, my fierce side flaring up to mask the fact that my heart was trying to kick its way out of my chest. You pull everything into your orbit. People, companies, mates. You don't even realize you're doing it. You just expect the world to tilt on its axis because you walked into the room. And yet, he whispered, his hand coming up to rest on the window glass right next to my head. You're the only thing that doesn't tilt. You're the only thing that stands still while everything else spins. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to be an alpha in a world of yes men, Petra? I didn't want a mate who would follow me. I wanted a mate who would tell me to go to hell. Well, mission accomplished, I said, though my voice lacked its usual bite. He leaned in, his nose brushing against mine. The scent of the wildfire was overwhelming now, a physical force between us. Prove it, he murmured. Tell me to go to hell right now, and I'll walk into the other room and leave you alone. I opened my mouth to say it. The words were there, practiced and ready. But as his thumb ghosted over my jawline, tracing the path where the scent patch used to be, my breath hitched. I didn't want him to leave. I wanted to win this argument, but I didn't want him to leave. Hell is a bit far, I whispered. Maybe just the kitchen for more scotch. He let out a low, rough laugh and started to lean in, his lips a fraction of an inch from mine, when a sudden, high-pitched alarm began to blare from the foyer. Not the security alarm, not the fire alarm. What now? I groaned, leaning my forehead against his chest. That, Eric said, his voice tight with sudden realization, is the biological containment sensor. Someone just released a high-frequency pheromone suppressant into the ventilation ducts. Eric, I said, a cold dread pooling in my stomach as the room began to fill with a faint, sweet-smelling mist. I can't feel my legs. Chapter 5. The world tilted, and this time it wasn't because of Eric's personality. My knees buckled, and for the second time tonight, I found myself braced against Eric's chest. But he wasn't standing steady either. He stumbled back, his arm hooking around my waist to keep us both upright as we slid down the glass wall until we were sitting on the cold marble floor. Petra, he groaned, his voice sounding like it was underwater. The mist. Stay low. I can't move, I whispered. The fierce, biting wit that usually fueled me was being replaced by a terrifying, syrupy lethargy. The mist was swirling through the candlelight, a shimmering veil of silver. What is it? Marcus? No, Eric hissed, his eyes struggling to stay focused. Marcus is an idiot, but he's not a chemist. This is an alpha blocker. It's designed to neutralize a shifter's nervous system, but it's not supposed to affect humans. Newsflash, I said, my tongue feeling heavy in my mouth. I'm not exactly human right now, remember? My scent is wide open. My system is reacting to the fated bond, and this stuff is short-circuiting the connection. It felt like someone was trying to pull a plug out of a socket that was fused shut. The bond, the invisible, golden thread that had been humming between us since the elevator, was being hacked. It hurt. It wasn't a physical pain, but a deep, psychic ache that made me want to howl. Eric's grip on me tightened, his fingers digging into my hip. He was fighting it. His wolf was clawing at the surface, trying to burn through the suppressant with sheer heat. I could feel his heart hammering against my back, a frantic, rhythmic thud. Petra, listen to me, he gasped, his face pressed into the crook of my neck. He wasn't looking for a scent now. He was looking for an anchor. The concierge desk, your bag. Did you have any neutralizing agents? I tried to think through the fog. My bag, my professional kit. I always carried a small vial of scent neutralizer B, a potent ammonia-based compound used for cleaning up shifter-related accidents in high-end hotels. It was a sensory shock, a literal wake-up call for the olfactory system. In the crate, I managed to choke out. Small blue bottle, near the kale. Eric looked at the table across the room. It might as well have been on the moon. He let out a low, guttural growl, his eyes flashing a brilliant, terrifying amber. He started to crawl, dragging his body across the marble with an agonizing effort. He looked like a fallen king, stripped of his grace but none of his drive. I watched him, my vision blurring. Eric, stop. You're going to pass out. Never, he grunted, his hand reaching for the edge of the table. He hooked a finger over the wood and pulled. The crate tipped. The organic kale tumbled out in a pathetic green heap, followed by a small sapphire blue glass bottle. It shattered on the floor. The smell hit the room like a physical blow. It was sharp, biting, and smelled like a lightning strike in a lemon factory. It was hideous. It was beautiful. I gasped, my lungs burning as the ammonia cut through the sweet pheromone mist. The lethargy snapped. My nerves fired back to life with the sting of 1,000 needles. Eric let out a roar, slamming his palms against the floor as his strength returned in a violent surge. He didn't go for the door. He didn't go for the vents. He lunged back toward me, grabbing my face in his hands, his eyes wild and searching. "Are you back?" he demanded, his voice raw. "Petra, talk to me." "I'm back," I coughed, my eyes watering from the fumes. "And I'm going to kill whoever did that after I throw up." "It wasn't a hit," Eric said, his gaze shifting to the vents as the mist began to dissipate, sucked out by the emergency pressure release he must have triggered. "It was a test. Someone wanted to see if I'd protect the delivery girl or the merger papers." He pulled me into his lap, holding me with a desperation that shattered the last of my defenses. The sass was gone. The hiding was over. In the wreckage of the kale and the ammonia, there was only us. "I chose you," he whispered. "I'll always choose you." The power chose that exact moment to scream back to life. The penthouse erupted in light. The chandeliers, the floor lamps, the massive security screens, and on every single screen in the room, a video feed began to play. It was a live shot of the hallway outside. "Eric," I said, pointing a trembling finger at the monitors. There was a woman standing at the door. She was elegant, terrifying, and held a remote control in her hand. She looked exactly like Eric, but with colder eyes. "Mother," Eric breathed. The woman on the screen smiled and spoke, her voice echoing through the penthouse speakers. "Well, Eric, she survived the mist. I suppose she'll do for a daughter-in-law. Now open the door. We have a wedding to plan." Chapter 6. I stared at the screen, then at Eric, then back at the screen. The fierce, independent urban survivor in me wanted to find a window and a very long rope. The woman on the monitor, Eric's mother, the infamous Lydia, looked like she had just finished a casual game of croquet instead of a localized chemical assault on her only son. "She's joking," I said, my voice rising an octave. "Tell me she's joking. Tell me your family doesn't actually use pheromone suppressants as a compatibility test." Eric closed his eyes, a look of profound, soul-deep exhaustion crossing his face. "I'd love to tell you that, Petra. Truly. But my mother considers fated mates to be a biological liability, unless they can survive a basic environmental hazard. She calls it quality control." "Quality control?" I scrambled out of his lap, my legs finally working well enough to pace. "I am a concierge. I handle dinner reservations and hard-to-find theater tickets. I do not do quality control for billionaire wolf moms." Lydia's voice chimed through the speakers again, light and melodic. "Darling, if you can navigate a citywide blackout in a broken elevator with my son without clawing his eyes out, you're overqualified. Now, Eric, darling, be a good boy and unlock the foyer. My heels are killing me, and Marcus is in the guest suite crying into a spreadsheet. It's very distracting." Eric stood up, smoothing his suit jacket with a trembling hand. He looked at me, and for the first time, the confident alpha was gone. He looked genuinely terrified. "Petra," he said, his voice pleading. "Don't run. Please." If you run now, she'll just track you down with a drone fleet and I'll never hear the end of it. She's crazy, I hissed, gesturing wildly at the screen. She almost gassed us. She precisely gassed us, a voice said from the doorway. The foyer doors didn't just open. They glided aside to reveal Lydia in the flesh. She was wearing a Chanel suit that looked like it was woven from the dreams of conquered rivals. She didn't look at her son. She walked straight up to me, her eyes scanning me from my messy ponytail down to my scuffed work boots. I straightened my shoulders, my fierce streak roaring back to life. I didn't care if she was the queen of the wolves. She'd ruined my favorite pair of pants and almost killed my kale. You, I said, pointing a finger at her. You have exactly 5 seconds to explain why I shouldn't call the police, the EPA, and several tabloids. Lydia blinked, a slow, delighted smile spreading across her face. She turned to Eric. Oh, Eric, she's perfect. She has a spine. I was so worried you'd pick one of those whimpering debutantes who just want to talk about moon cycles. Mother, leave, Eric commanded, stepping between us. You've done enough. Petra is... She's not part of this. She's your mate, Eric. I could smell it from the lobby, Lydia said, dismissively waving a hand. She turned back to me, her gaze softening just a fraction. And you, Petra. You've spent 3 years hiding in plain sight. Impressive work, really. But the hiding is over. The board needs to see that the heir has found his anchor. I am nobody's anchor, I snapped. I am a person, with a job, and a cat who is currently wondering why I'm not home to give him his salmon treats. The cat has been fed, Lydia said calmly. I sent a team. He prefers the flaked tuna, by the way. The room went silent. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. You went to my apartment? I whispered. I secured your apartment, Lydia corrected. You can't live there anymore, dear. It's far too vulnerable. You'll stay here, of course. Eric has plenty of room and the security is... well, it's being upgraded tomorrow. I looked at Eric. He was pale, his jaw set in a hard line. He looked at me and I saw the conflict in his eyes. He wanted me to stay, but he hated how it was happening. Petra, he said quietly. You don't have to stay. I'll get you out. I'll deal with her. I looked at Lydia, who was currently inspecting the ruins of the organic kale with a look of mild disgust. Then I looked at the door. I could leave. I could run again. But as I looked at Eric, at the man who had crawled across a marble floor just to reach me, I realized I was tired of running. I turned back to Lydia, a slow, dangerous smile of my own beginning to form. Fine, I said. I'll stay, but under one condition. Lydia arched a perfectly groomed eyebrow. And that is? You're paying for the kale, I said. And I want a seat on that board. If I'm going to be an anchor, I'm going to be the one steering the ship. Eric let out a choked sound that was half laugh, half sob. Lydia's eyes sparkled with genuine respect. Deal, she said. But as she turned to lead the way into the dining room, her phone buzzed. She looked at it and her expression went stone cold. Eric, she said, her voice dropping all pretense of playfulness. We have a problem. The blackout wasn't citywide. It was a targeted dampening field. By who? Eric asked. Lydia looked at me, her eyes filled with a sudden, sharp pity. By the man Petra was actually hiding from, she said, and he's currently in the elevator. The lights in the penthouse flickered once, twice, and then turned blood red. Chapter 7. The blood-red emergency lights turned the opulent penthouse into something out of a high-fashion fever dream. I stared at the elevator doors, the same ones I'd escaped just hours ago, as the floor indicator began to climb. 61, 62. Targeted? I whispered, the word tasting like copper in my mouth. Eric, you said the whole city was dark. You said it was a grid failure. That's what the news feeds reported, Eric said, his voice dropping into a low, lethal growl. He stepped toward me, his hand finding the small of my back, urging me behind him. Mother, if you brought him here— Don't be tedious, Eric, Lydia snapped, though her usual poise was fractured. She was frantically swiping through her tablet, her face pale in the crimson light. I wanted to test her, not hand her over on a silver platter. I didn't even know Silas Thorne was in this hemisphere. He's supposed to be under house arrest in the European territories. Silas Thorne. The name hit me like a physical blow. Silas wasn't an alpha. He was a collector, a man obsessed with rare shifter genetics, a man who viewed fated bonds as a science project rather than a soul connection. He was the reason I'd spent 3 years breathing through chemical filters. He followed the scent trail, I realized, my voice trembling. The blackout, the dampening field failing. I might as well have set off a flare in the middle of the ocean. He hasn't caught you yet, Eric said, turning to face me. He gripped my shoulders, his eyes burning with a fierce, protective light. Petra, look at me. This is my house. He's coming into my territory, and he's doing it while I'm finally awake. He is not taking you. He doesn't need to take me, Eric, I said, my fierce edge returning as the initial shock wore off. Silas doesn't use muscles. He uses lawyers, lobbyists, and long-range tranquilizers. If he's in that elevator, he has a legal reclamation order in his pocket. He's been trying to claim my lineage for the Thorne Council since I was 18. The elevator chimed, a cheerful, mundane sound that felt like a death knell. The doors slid open. But the man who stepped out wasn't Silas Thorne. It was a teenager. He was wearing a delivery uniform identical to mine, holding a tablet and looking incredibly confused. Mister? The kid asked, squinting in the red light. The service stairs were open, but the hallway was really dark. I have a delivery for Petra? It says it's an urgent medical override for a scent masker type 4. I blinked. I didn't order a replacement. I did, Lydia said, stepping forward and snatching the tablet from the boy. The moment I realized your patch was failing, I had my personal courier fetch the latest military-grade model from my private vault. I may be a meddler, Petra, but I'm a meddler who protects her investments. Eric let out a breath that sounded like a deflating balloon. Mother, you just said Silas Thorne was in the elevator. He was, Lydia said, her eyes fixed on the tablet. According to the lobby security feed, he entered the building 5 minutes ago, but it seems he's currently trapped in Elevator B, which I just remotely jammed between the 10th and 11th floors. He'll be there until the police arrive to discuss his illegal use of a dampening field. I felt my knees go weak. I leaned against a marble pillar, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. You gassed me, galled me, and then saved me from a supervillain by jamming an elevator? It's called multitasking, dear, Lydia said, handing me a small, sleek silver case. Now put that on. We have 30 minutes before Silas's legal team realizes he's stuck in a metal box, and I intend to have you officially signed into the PAC registry before they can file a single motion. Registry? I asked, my eyes narrowing. Wait, is this the wedding you were talking about? It's a partnership, Eric intervened, stepping between me and his mother's predatory helpfulness. Petra, you don't have to sign anything. We can fight Thorne in court. We can move you to the coast. I looked at the silver case in my hand, then at the elevator where a monster was currently cooling his heels, and then at the alpha who had spent the night trying to prove he was different. Eric, I said, a slow, sassy smile spreading across my face. Do you have a pen? Because if I'm going to be a biological liability, I want to make sure I'm the most expensive one you've ever owned. Eric grinned, but before he could respond, the red lights didn't just flicker. They died completely. And from the foyer we heard the sound of glass shattering. Chapter 8. The sound of shattering glass in a penthouse is never a good sign. It usually means someone has bypassed the triple reinforced security and is currently standing in your living room. Eric didn't wait. He moved with a blurred speed I hadn't seen yet, his hand locking onto my arm as he pulled me into the shadows of the dining alcove. Mother, get to the safe room, Eric commanded. And leave you two to handle the decor? I think not, Lydia whispered. though she pulled a small, elegant stun baton from her handbag. Petra, stay behind me. I've had this suit tailored for mobility, and I'm not afraid to ruin it. Nobody is ruining anything, I whispered back, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm. The glass. It came from the balcony. We peered around the corner. The floor-to-ceiling windows were intact, but the glass coffee table in the center of the room had been pulverized. Standing over the wreckage was a drone, a small, sleek black insect of a machine that was currently projecting a holographic image into the center of the room. The image flickered to life, revealing a man with silver hair and eyes as cold as a mountain lake. Silas Thorne. Eric, the hologram said, its voice tinny but authoritative. And Petra. How touching. A reunion in the dark. Silas, Eric spat, stepping into the light. You're trespassing, and your drone just cost me $20,000 in Italian glass. A pittance compared to what Petra is worth to the council, Silas replied. He didn't look at Eric, his gaze fixed on the spot where I was hiding. Petra, stop this nonsense. You've had your 3 years of playing human. It's time to come home. The compatibility trials for the new alpha strain start on Monday, and you're the primary control group. I am not a lab rat, Silas, I shouted, stepping out from behind Lydia. I'm a citizen. I have rights. You have a fated bond with a Thorne-compatible bloodline, Silas said smoothly. Which makes you a matter of pack security. The family can't protect you from a federal mandate. Eric, if you harbor her, I'll have your corporate charter revoked before sunrise. Eric laughed, a dark, dangerous sound that made Silas's hologram flicker. My charter? Silas, I own the bank that holds your family's mortgage. If you want to talk about revocation, let's talk about why you're currently stuck in my elevator while your drone is committing a felony in my living room. I'm not in the elevator, Silas said, a thin, cruel smile touching his lips. I'm in the lobby, surrounded by 3 federal marshals and a warrant for Petra's immediate protective custody. Your mother's little trick with the elevator only worked on my assistant. Lydia cursed under her breath. The man is a cockroach. Petra, Silas continued, his eyes zeroing in on me. You have 10 minutes to come down. If you don't, the marshals will come up, and I don't think Eric wants his penthouse turned into a crime scene. The hologram vanished. The drone hovered for a second, then zipped back out through the open balcony door, disappearing into the rainy night. I turned to Eric, the panic rising in my throat. He has a warrant. Eric, if the feds are here... He has a warrant for a John Doe ward, Eric said, his brain clearly working at 1,000 miles an hour. He doesn't have a warrant for a Petra, look at me, the registry. If you sign it, you're legally part of my family. My lawyers can tie him up in red tape for the next decade. But I'm not a Y, I said, and I don't want to be a ward of your pack either. Then don't be a ward, Eric said, grabbing my hands. Be a partner, a co-chair, a wife. I don't care about the title, Petra. I just care about the fact that he's waiting in the lobby and I'm standing right here. A wife? I asked, a bubble of hysterical humor surfacing. Eric, we haven't even been on a first date. I'm pretty sure trapped in an elevator doesn't count toward the engagement period. I'll take you to Paris, he promised, his eyes desperate. I'll take you to the moon. Just don't let him take you back to that lab. I looked at Lydia. She was holding the registration tablet out like a peace offering. I looked at the door. Then I looked at the small silver case containing the new scent masker. Eric, I said, my voice steadying. If I sign this, I'm going to make your life a living hell. I'm going to change the furniture, I'm going to fire your nutritionist, and I'm never, ever going to smell like lilies again. Deal, he whispered. I grabbed the tablet and swiped my signature across the screen. The moment I did, a green light flashed and a notification chirped. Registration complete. Welcome to the pack, Petra. I groaned. That's terrible branding. We'll work on it, Eric said, pulling me into a hard, brief kiss that tasted of scotch and victory. But the moment he pulled away, the elevator chimed again. This time, it wasn't a courier. The doors opened to reveal 3 men in tactical gear, followed by Silas Thorne. "Time's up," Silas said, stepping into the room. He looked at me, then at the tablet in Lydia's hand. "Petra, let's go. Don't make this difficult." "Actually," I said, stepping forward and flashing the tablet screen at him like a weapon. "I think you're the one making things difficult, Silas. I'm a now, which means you're currently standing in a private residence without an invitation. Eric, what do we do with trespassers?" Eric stepped up beside me, his alpha aura radiating so strongly it practically hummed. "We ask them to leave, and if they don't, we call the board of directors." Silas sneered. "A piece of digital paper won't stop a federal warrant, Eric." "No," a new voice said from the hallway, "but a conflict of interest will." Marcus, the assistant, stepped into the room, looking significantly less rumpled and much more smug. He was holding a stack of papers. "Mr. Thorne, I just received word. It seems your family's firm just sold its majority stake in the Protective Custody Division to Holdings. As of 3 minutes ago, you're technically an employee of the man you're trying to sue." Silas froze. The tactical team looked at each other, confused. You bought the division?" Silas whispered. "I have a very efficient mother," Eric said, glancing at Lydia. I started to laugh, a genuine, fierce laugh. But as Silas backed toward the elevator, his face twisting in rage, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small glass vial. "If I can't have the control group," he hissed, "nobody will." He threw the vial at the floor. It didn't release a gas. It released a brilliant, blinding light, a sensory flare. When my eyes finally cleared, Silas was gone. And so was Eric. Chapter 9. The penthouse was silent. The red lights were still glowing, but the tactical team had vanished, and Silas Thorne's shadow was nowhere to be seen. I blinked, my retinas screaming from the flare, and reached out for the pillar I'd been leaning against. "Eric?" I called out. My voice sounded hollow in the vast room. "Lydia? Marcus?" No answer. I stumbled toward the center of the room, my boots crunching on the remains of the glass table. The air was still thick with the smell of the sensory flare, a sharp, ozone-heavy scent that made my nose itch. But underneath it, I could still smell the wildfire. Eric was close. He had to be. "Eric, this isn't funny," I said, my fierce exterior starting to crack. "If this is another test or some alpha bonding exercise, I'm going to divorce you before the ink even dries on that digital registry." I turned a full circle. The penthouse felt different. The luxury felt cold, the marble like ice. I realized with a jolt of terror that the faded bond, that warm golden hum in the back of my mind, was silent. It was as if someone had cut the wire. "Lydia!" I shouted, heading for the guest suite. "Marcus!" I pushed open the doors to the dining room. Empty. I ran to the master bedroom. Empty. The safe room door was standing wide open, its heavy steel frame undamaged, but there was nobody inside. I ran back to the foyer, my heart hammering against my ribs. The elevator was still on the 64th floor, the doors open. I stepped inside, desperate to see if they were hiding in the shaft, but the car was empty. Except for one thing. On the floor of the elevator, right where I'd stood hours ago, was a single, perfect lily. It wasn't a real flower. It was made of glass, the same Italian glass as Eric's coffee table, and tied to the stem was a small, handwritten note on corporate stationery. "Check the kale, Petra." I scrambled out of the elevator and ran back to the kitchen island where the pathetic heap of organic greens was still sitting. I tore through the leaves, my fingers shaking, until I felt something hard and cold. It was a USB drive. I ran to the nearest workstation, a sleek holographic terminal that Eric had been using earlier. I plugged the drive in, my breath coming in short, jagged gasps. A single file appeared on the screen. Scent Masker V5 Prototype. Notes. I clicked it. But it wasn't a blueprint. It was a video. The screen flickered to life, showing Eric. He was sitting in this very room, but the lighting was different. He looked tired. His tie was loosened, and he was staring directly into the camera with an intensity that made me feel like he was standing right in front of me. "Petra," his voice said, sounding filtered and distant. "If you're watching this, it means the blackout happened. It means Silas Thorne found you. And it means I'm currently missing." I leaned into the screen, my hand covering my mouth. "Eric, what are you talking about?" "You think this was all a coincidence?" The video Eric asked, a sad, self-deprecating smile touching his lips. "The elevator, the blackout, the scent masker failing? I've known where you were for 3 years, Petra. I didn't hunt you because I wanted to give you space. But Silas Thorne doesn't give space. He was coming for you tonight, whether I was involved or not." The video cut to a shot of a laboratory, a clean, white space filled with humming machinery. "I didn't buy the protective custody division to stop him," Eric's voice continued. "I bought it to lure him in. I needed him to think he had a chance so I could get close enough to his primary server. The sensory flare, it wasn't his. It was mine. It was a localized transport field." The video cut back to Eric. He leaned closer to the lens. "Petra, listen to me. You're a now. You have the legal protection. You have the money. But you're only safe as long as they think I'm with Silas. I had to let him kidnap me. It's the only way to get inside his compound and delete your records for good." "You idiot," I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. "You arrogant, self-sacrificing alpha idiot." "I know what you're thinking," Eric said as if he could hear me. "You're thinking you should come after me. You're thinking you can use your concierge skills to track a billionaire's kidnapping. Don't. Stay in the penthouse. Lydia will be back in 10 minutes. She's just in the basement resetting the dampening field. Stay safe. Stay hidden." The video ended, the screen fading to black. I stood in the silent, red-lit room, the USB drive clutched in my hand. I looked at the glass lily. I looked at the door. Eric wanted me to stay. He wanted me to be the ghost again, protected by his name and his walls. But he clearly forgot who he was talking to. I reached for my bag and pulled out the new military-grade scent masker Lydia had given me. I snapped it onto my neck, feeling the microcurrent pulse to life. The honey and wildfire vanished, replaced by the cold, sharp scent of ozone and determination. I wasn't going to be a ghost, and I certainly wasn't going to stay in a penthouse while my husband was playing hero in a lab. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby, but as the doors started to close, a hand reached in and stopped them. It was Marcus. He wasn't wearing his suit anymore. He was wearing tactical gear, and he was holding a set of keys. "The car is downstairs, Mrs." he said, a sharp, fierce glint in his eyes. "And I took the liberty of tracking the transport field's signature. We have exactly 20 minutes before they cross the state line." I stepped into the elevator and looked at him. "Marcus, why are you helping me? Eric told me to stay." Marcus smirked. "Mr. pays me to follow his orders, but you're the one who told me to get the good scotch. I prefer a boss with taste." The elevator began to drop, but just as we hit the 40th floor, the car jolted and the lights went out again. A voice came over the intercom, not Eric's and not Lydia's. It was a woman's voice, low and raspy. "Going down, Petra? I don't think so. We haven't even finished the first trial." The elevator didn't stop. It began to freefall. Chapter 10. The freefall didn't feel like flying. It felt like the world had decided to subtract the floor from the equation of my existence. Weightlessness is a terrifyingly quiet thing until the emergency brakes start screaming. The elevator car shrieked, metal grinding against metal as the magnetic clamps fought a losing battle against gravity and whatever virus had been uploaded into the building's brain. "Marcus!" I yelled, my back slamming against the ceiling as the car jolted. "Tell me you have a plan that doesn't involve us becoming a permanent part of the lobby floor." Marcus was pinned against the opposite corner, his tactical vest snagging on a handrail. Despite the fact that we were plummeting toward a very expensive crater, he was frantically tapping at his wrist-mounted comms. "Working. On it. The override is being overridden." That's not a plan, Marcus. That's a status report. I scrambled for the service hatch I'd used earlier, but the G-force was pinning me down like a giant's thumb. The raspy woman's voice crackled over the intercom again, sounding entirely too amused. You're so much more entertaining than the files suggested, Petra. Most fated mates just faint. You're actually arguing with the help while you're traveling at 90 miles per hour. I am the help, I screamed at the ceiling. And if I die, I'm haunting your HR department first. Bracing, Marcus roared. The car didn't hit the bottom. Instead, there was a violent, bone-jarring thud as the secondary emergency buffers, a series of high-tension industrial springs Eric had likely installed for this exact mad scientist scenario, engaged at the 10th floor. We bounced. My stomach stayed at the 20th floor, while my body hit the carpeted deck of the elevator. Silence rushed back in, broken only by the hiss of escaping hydraulic fluid. Marcus? I groaned, untangling my limbs. If you say, "We've arrived," I'm going to fire you. We've reached a mid-level destination, he wheezed, pushing himself up. He looked at the doors, which were jammed half open, revealing the dark, concrete cavern of the building's mid-tier parking garage. And the car is currently smoking. We need to move. Now. I didn't need a second invitation. I scrambled through the gap, my boots hitting the oil-slicked concrete. Behind us, the elevator car gave one final, pathetic groan and settled into the pit. I looked around the garage. It was empty, save for a row of blacked-out SUVs and the low-profile sports car Eric usually reserved for his weekend incognito drives. But standing between us and the car was a woman. She was tall, wearing a lab coat over a tactical jumpsuit, and holding a tranquilizer rifle with the casual grace of someone who did this for a living. "Petra," she said, her voice the same raspy one from the intercom. "I'm Dr. Eris. I ran your initial blood panels when you were 18. You've grown quite a bit since then. The wildfire scent is much more potent. And you're much more trespassing," I snapped, stepping in front of Marcus. I didn't have a weapon, but I had 3 years of repressed rage and a very sharp metal clipboard I'd grabbed from the elevator wreckage. "Where is Eric?" "Mr. is currently undergoing a standard intake procedure at the Thorne facility," Eris said, raising the rifle. "He was quite cooperative. It's amazing what an alpha will do when he thinks his mate is safe in a glass penthouse. It's a pity he was wrong." "He wasn't wrong about one thing," I said, my voice dropping into a low, dangerous hiss. "I'm not a lab rat, and I'm definitely not going with you. You don't have a choice, dear. The air in this garage is currently 10% sedative gas. You have about 30 seconds before your motor functions fail." I felt the first tingle of numbness in my fingertips. I looked at Marcus. He was already swaying. "Marcus," I whispered. "The car, the good Scotch button." Marcus's eyes cleared for a split second. He lunged for the sports car, hitting a sequence on his key fob. The car's security system didn't just chirp. It let out a high-decibel sonic blast designed to shatter glass and eardrums. Dr. Eris screamed, dropping her rifle as she clutched her ears. I didn't wait. I grabbed the heavy clipboard and hurled it with everything I had. It didn't hit her, but it smashed the light fixture above her head, showering her in sparks. In the confusion, I grabbed Marcus by his vest and shoved him toward the driver's seat. "Drive!" I yelled, diving into the passenger side. "Where?" Marcus gasped, his hands shaking as he gripped the wheel. "To the Thorne facility," I said, slamming the door. "If Eric wants to play hero, he's going to need a sidekick who knows how to break a lease." As we roared out of the garage, I looked in the rearview mirror. Dr. Eris was standing up, her face twisted in a cold, clinical smile. She wasn't chasing us. She was watching us go. "She let us leave," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a cold wave. "Marcus, she let us leave." "Why would she do that?" "Because," I said, looking at the dashboard as a new GPS coordinate began to glow in blood red. "The facility isn't where we're going. We're already inside it." The walls of the exit ramp didn't lead to the street. They began to shift, the concrete sliding away to reveal a high-tech tunnel that sloped deep, deep underground. Chapter 11. The tunnel was a masterpiece of clinical horror. White tiles, recessed LED strips that pulsed with a rhythmic, heartbeat-like glow, and a silence so thick it felt like it was trying to crawl into my ears. Marcus kept the car at a steady 60, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as the GPS continued to pulse that mocking red light. "I've worked for Eric for 5 years," Marcus muttered, his voice echoing in the confined space. "I've seen him hostile take over 3 banks and a small island. I have never seen a tunnel like this under his own building." "It's not under his building anymore," I said, leaning forward to inspect the walls. "We crossed the property line a mile ago. Thorne didn't just build a facility, he built a parasite. He's been tapping into the infrastructure for years, right under Eric's nose." "Eric's nose is usually buried in a spreadsheet or a very expensive neck," Marcus noted, his sarcasm returning as his adrenaline stabilized. "So what's the plan, Mrs.? We're driving into the belly of the beast. Do we have a heist mode on this car?" "We have a concierge mode," I said, reaching for the glove box. I found what I was looking for: Eric's emergency burner phone and a small, velvet-lined case containing a pair of high-end cufflinks. I frowned. "Cufflinks? Really? He's being kidnapped and he packs accessories?" "Look closer," Marcus said. I opened the cufflinks. Inside weren't jewels, but 2 micro-vials of a deep, violet liquid. My chemical-masking brain recognized it instantly. "Neurostimulants. Concentrated. This isn't for us to wake up. It's to force a shifter into a full moon-level transformation regardless of the lunar cycle." Eric was planning a jailbreak before he even got arrested, I whispered, a surge of reluctant admiration hitting me. He didn't want to just delete my files. He wanted to burn the whole system down from the inside. The tunnel ended abruptly in a massive, circular chamber. The car skidded to a halt as 4 automated turrets descended from the ceiling, their red targeting lasers painting neat little dots on my chest. "Don't move," a voice boomed, Silas Thorne's voice, amplified through a dozen speakers. "Welcome to the hive, Petra. Marcus, you can leave. Your severance package has been deposited into your offshore account. You've done your job." I froze, looking at Marcus. His hands were still on the wheel. He didn't look at me. "Marcus?" I whispered. "The severance was very generous, Mrs." Marcus said, his voice flat. He turned his head slowly, and for the first time I saw the small, glowing amber chip embedded behind his ear. He wasn't a traitor. He was a puppet. "They're controlling him," I realized, the fierce protectiveness in me flaring into a white-hot rage. "Silas, you coward! Let him go!" "He's perfectly fine, Petra. He's just highly compliant. As you will be." The turrets hummed, a low-frequency vibration that made my teeth ache. "Now, step out of the car. Eric is waiting for you in the observation suite. He's been very vocal about his disapproval of our decor. I think he needs his anchor to calm him down." I stepped out of the car, the cufflinks hidden in the palm of my hand. The air in the chamber smelled like ozone and antiseptic, the smell of my nightmares. 2 guards in white tactical gear approached me, but they didn't touch me. They didn't have to. The turrets were enough. They led me through a series of pressurized doors into a room that looked like a 5-star hotel suite, if the hotel were located inside a nuclear silo. Eric was there. He was sitting in a leather armchair, a glass of scotch in his hand, looking like he was waiting for a business meeting to start. But his eyes, they were a swirling, chaotic gold. He was on the edge of a total shift. "Petra," he said, his voice a low, vibrating growl. He didn't stand up. He couldn't. I could see the heavy, silver mesh restraints hidden under his sleeves, tethering him to the chair. "You shouldn't have come." "I had a delivery to make," I said, walking toward him with a swagger I didn't feel. I stopped 3 feet away, the guards hovering behind me. "Besides, I hear the service here is terrible." "It's a bit clinical for my taste," Eric said, his jaw tight as he fought the urge to howl. Silas wants a demonstration, Petra. He wants to see the wildfire bond in action under stress. He thinks if he can measure the resonance, he can replicate it. He can't replicate a choice, Eric, I said, reaching out to touch his face. The guards moved to stop me, but Eric let out a sound so visceral, so predatory, that they actually flinched back. I cupped his jaw, my thumb grazing his bottom lip. I could feel the heat radiating off him. He wasn't just an alpha, he was a sun about to go supernova. The cufflinks, I whispered, so low only a wolf could hear. Eric's eyes widened for a fraction of a second. He knew. Silas, I shouted, looking up at the one-way glass of the observation window. You want to see a demonstration? You want to see what happens when you try to cage a fated bond? I'm waiting, Petra, Silas's voice crackled. Then watch closely, I said. I didn't kiss Eric. I leaned down and bit his ear, hard enough to draw blood, and hard enough to slip the microvials into his mouth. Eric's entire body went rigid. The scotch glass shattered in his hand. Petra! Silas screamed over the intercom. What did you do? I just gave him his morning espresso, I said, stepping back with a sassy, terrifying grin. Eric didn't shift into a wolf. He didn't grow fur or claws. He did something much worse. He simply stood up. The silver mesh restraints didn't break. They melted. The heat coming off him was so intense the air began to shimmer. Silas, Eric said, his voice no longer human. It sounded like the earth cracking open. You wanted to measure the resonance? Here's the first note. He slammed his fist into the floor, and the entire facility groaned. But he didn't attack the guards. He turned to me and grabbed my waist, pulling me into a kiss that felt like being consumed by a forest fire. And then, the floor vanished. Chapter 12. The floor hadn't actually disappeared. Eric had just punched through the structural weak point of the subterranean lab, and we were currently falling through a mess of broken rebar and high-tech debris into the level below. We landed on a soft, gel-like surface, the Thorne facility's emergency bio-waste reservoir. It was disgusting, smelled like a chemical plant, and was the only reason our spines weren't currently dust. I scrambled up the slick, translucent slope of the reservoir, coughing and wiping the gel from my eyes. Eric, if that was your version of a dramatic exit, we need to discuss your grasp of physics. Eric rose from the gel like a vengeful sea god, his shirt torn and his eyes glowing with an unearthly violet light. The neurostimulant was still surging through him, amplifying his alpha aura to a point where the very air felt heavy. Physics are a suggestion when you're this caffeinated, Petra, he rasped, reaching out to haul me the rest of the way up. He looked at his hands. They were trembling, not with fear, but with raw, uncontained energy. We have maybe 10 minutes before my nervous system decides to shut down for a week. We need to find the server core and Marcus. Marcus is upstairs being a puppet, I said, checking my own gear. My scent masker was still holding, but the wildfire was starting to bleed through again, drawn out by Eric's proximity. And Silas is probably currently calling in the cavalry. Let them come, Eric said. He grabbed a piece of jagged rebar and tossed it aside like a toothpick. I've spent 3 years being the civilized. I think it's time I reminded Silas why my family owns the mountain. We moved through the lower levels, a maze of holding cells and testing chambers. It was quiet. Too quiet. The guards hadn't followed us down. They're funneling us, I whispered, my concierge-level spatial awareness kicking in. They aren't chasing us because they know exactly where we're going. The server core is a trap, Eric. Everything in my life is a trap, Petra. That's why I married a woman who knows how to pick locks. He stopped in front of a massive circular vault door. It didn't have a keypad. It had a biological scanner. It needs a Thorne bloodline, I realized, looking at the scanner's needle. Silas. He knew we'd come here. He wants us to find a way in so he can trap us inside the core. He doesn't need a Thorne, a voice said from the shadows behind us. I spun around. Marcus was standing there, He still had the amber chip behind his ear, but his eyes were different. They were clear, focused, and filled with a profound sadness. He was holding a small silver remote. "Marcus?" Eric stepped forward, his growl returning. "Get back. I don't want to hurt you." "You won't have to, mister," Marcus said. He looked at me, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "The chip. It's not just a controller, it's a bridge. Silas wanted to use me to get to you, but he forgot one thing." "What's that?" I asked, my heart breaking for the man who had been my only ally in the dark. "I'm a very good assistant," Marcus said, "and I've been taking notes on his encryption for 6 months. I can open the door, but once I do, the feedback loop will erase the bridge, and me with it." "No!" I shouted. "There has to be another way. We can cut the chip out." "There's no time," Marcus said, his hand hovering over the remote. "The tactical teams are 2 minutes away. If you don't get into that core and delete the records now, Silas wins. He'll have your bloodline, your mate, and your life." He looked at Eric. "Take care of her, sir. She's the only thing in this building that isn't for sale." Marcus hit the button. The vault door hissed, the heavy bolts retracting with a sound like thunder. But as the door swung open, a high-pitched, agonizing whine erupted from Marcus's chip. He collapsed to his knees, his face twisting in pain. "Marcus!" I lunged for him, but Eric caught me, his strength absolute. "Petra, we have to go!" Eric yelled over the sound of the alarm. "We can't leave him!" "He's already gone, Petra!" Eric pointed to Marcus. The light in the chip had turned red, and Marcus's eyes were rolling back. He wasn't Marcus anymore. He was just a shell. But as we turned to enter the core, a figure stepped out from the darkness inside. It wasn't Silas. It wasn't Eris. It was a woman who looked exactly like me. Same hair, same eyes, same fierce set to her jaw. But she was wearing a Thorne Council uniform, and she was holding a vial of something that glowed with a sickening neon green light. "Hello, sister," the woman said, her voice a perfect mirror of my own. "I've been waiting 3 years to meet the Wildfire version of myself. I hope you're as flammable as they say." She threw the vial at the server racks, and the entire room erupted into a wall of emerald flame. Chapter 13. The emerald fire didn't behave like a normal blaze. It didn't crackle. It hissed, a low, predatory sound as it devoured the server racks, turning years of data, and my hope for a quiet life, into toxic green smoke. But the woman standing in the center of the chaos was the real nightmare. She shifted her weight with my exact rhythm, her smirk a twisted reflection of the one I'd used to deflect Eric all night. "Sister?" I managed to choke out, the word feeling like a mouthful of ash. "I don't have a sister. I'm a concierge from the city. I have a cat and a credit score, not a biological double." "You have a bloodline that Silas Thorne spent millions to isolate," the woman replied, her voice a terrifyingly perfect match for my own. "I'm the refined version, Petra, the one who didn't run, the one who stayed in the lab and embraced the wildfire." She stepped forward, and the air around her didn't just smell like my scent. It smelled like a concentrated, weaponized version of it. It was honey and wildfire, but the honey was fermented and the fire was laced with gasoline. The sheer sensory impact hit me like a physical blow, making my knees buckle. "Petra!" Eric's voice was a ragged roar. He was torn. His alpha instinct screamed to shield me, but his hands were currently occupied trying to drag Marcus's unconscious body away from the spreading green flames. The neurostimulant was still vibrating through him, making his every movement a blur of violet-tinged power. "Don't look at her! It's a sensory mimicry." "It's more than mimicry, Eric." The double laughed, her eyes flashing with a cold, clinical light. "I'm the bridge Silas needs. And once I consume the wild version of my essence, the Thorne merger will be permanent, starting with you." She lunged. She didn't have claws, but she moved with a frightening, calculated efficiency. I dodged her first strike, my urban survivor instincts kicking in. I didn't have her training, but I had 3 years of dodging handsy businessmen and navigating high-speed subway doors. I grabbed a heavy, discarded server chassis and swung it with a grunt of effort. She caught it with one hand. Is that the best the fierce Petra can do? Luggage handling skills? I'm a concierge, I snapped, my sass flaring even as my lungs burned. I know how to handle oversized baggage, and you, honey, are carrying a lot of it. I kicked her knee, a dirty, effective street move that caught her off guard. As she stumbled, I didn't go for her throat. I went for the console. If the green fire was eating the data, I needed to make sure it finished the job. Eric, the fire suppression override, I yelled. It's not for water, it's a vacuum seal. If we trigger it, the oxygen dies, but so does the fire. And so do we, Eric countered, hoisting Marcus over his shoulder. He looked at the emerald flames licking at the ceiling. Petra, if I trip that seal, we have 30 seconds to hit the airlock. Then you better start running, I shouted. I turned back to my double, who was recovering with a snarl. Hey sis, you want my life? Come and take it. I didn't wait for her to respond. I sprinted toward the server core, weaving through the emerald pillars of flame. She was right on my heels, her scent signature screaming in my mind like a siren. I reached the override lever, a massive red-painted bar of iron, and hung my entire weight off it. The sound was deafening. A series of massive steel shutters slammed down, sealing the server room off from the rest of the facility. The hiss of the fire changed to a high-pitched whistle as the pumps began to suck the air out of the room. My double's eyes widened. For the first time, she looked human, terrified. You'll kill us both! Better a dead ghost than a caged lab rat, I gasped, the air already thinning. Eric was at the far door, his hand outstretched, his violet eyes glowing with a desperate, frantic light. Petra! Now! I dived. I felt my sister's fingers brush against my heel, a desperate, clawing attempt to drag me back into the vacuum. I kicked back, my boot connecting with her jaw, and rolled through the airlock just as the final shutter slammed shut. I lay on the cold floor of the hallway, gasping for air that didn't taste like chemicals. Eric was over me in an instant, his heat a blanket against the chill of the facility. Is it done? I wheezed. The core is a vacuum, Eric said, his voice trembling. The records, the samples, everything is gone, including her. I looked at the thick, reinforced glass of the airlock window. Inside, the green fire was out. The room was a dark, silent tomb. My sister was gone. But then, the glass began to crack. Not from the vacuum. From a rhythmic, heavy thumping on the other side. Petra, Eric whispered, pulling me back. Look at the thermal. On the security monitor next to the door, a heat signature was growing. It wasn't human-shaped anymore. It was massive, jagged, and pulsed with a neon green light that defied the vacuum. The mirror sister wasn't dead. She was evolving. Chapter 14. The thumping against the reinforced glass sounded like a heartbeat played through a stadium speaker. Each strike sent a spider web of cracks across the surface. This wasn't the calculation of a scientist or the grace of a sister. It was the raw, mindless hunger of a biological weapon that had just been stripped of its oxygen and its purpose. The airlock won't hold, Marcus croaked from the floor. He was pale, the puncture mark from the extracted chip bleeding sluggishly, but his eyes were clear. The green fire wasn't just a catalyst. It was a fuel. She's absorbing the residual energy from the server racks. Eric, we need to go, now, I said, grabbing his arm. My fierce was currently being held together by spite and adrenaline, but even I knew when a situation had moved from heist to horror movie. Eric stood his ground, his violet eyes narrowing. The neurostimulant in his system was peaking, making the air around him hum with a static charge. If we leave now, she breaks out into the main facility. She'll reach the ventilation shafts. She'll be in the city within the hour. And what are you going to do? I snapped, pointing at the cracking glass. Punch a green fire monster? Eric, you're an alpha, not a fire extinguisher. He corrected, his voice dropping into that terrifyingly calm billionaire wolf register. And S, don't leave a mess for the cleaning crew. Petra, take Marcus. Get to the transport bay. There's a high-speed maglev train that leads directly to my private airfield. I am not leaving you here to play martyr, I yelled, stepping into his space. The scent of him, smoke and expensive scotch, was the only thing keeping me grounded. Now, remember? That means we share the bad ideas. It's not a bad idea, Eric said, reaching out to cut my face. His touch was scorching, but it didn't burn. It's a merger. I'm going to overload the facility's core. The Emerald Fire needs a stable environment. I'm going to give it a sun. The glass shattered. A cloud of green mist exploded into the hallway, followed by a hand that looked like it was made of translucent, glowing jade. It wasn't flesh. It was a solidified essence of the wildfire scent, a physical manifestation of a fated bond gone wrong. My sister pulled herself through the jagged hole, her body elongated, her eyes glowing with a sickly neon light. She didn't speak. She just let out a sound like a forest fire being sucked into a vacuum, a high-pitched, screaming hiss. Go! Eric roared, his body finally beginning the shift he'd been fighting all night. His bones cracked with the sound of snapping timber, his suit jacket shredding as his shoulders broadened and his jaw elongated. He didn't turn into a wolf. He became something older, a primal alpha form that stood 7 feet tall and radiated a heat that turned the green mist to steam. I didn't argue this time. I grabbed Marcus, throwing his arm over my shoulder, and began to run. The hallway was a blur of white tile and red emergency lights. Behind us, the sounds of the struggle were cataclysmic, the roar of an alpha meeting the scream of an emerald eclipse. We reached the transport bay, a cavernous space filled with sleek silver pods. I threw Marcus into the nearest one and slammed my hand against the manual start button. Wait! Marcus wheezed, grabbing my wrist. The core. If Eric overloads it, the blast radius is 5 miles. The maglev won't be fast enough. Then we make it faster, I said, my fingers flying over the pod's control panel. I didn't know how to pilot a maglev, but I knew how to navigate a concierge database under pressure. There's a emergency ejection protocol. It uses the vacuum tubes to shoot the pod out like a railgun. It's never been tested with people inside. Then today is our lucky day, I muttered. I looked back down the tunnel. The green light was growing brighter, a tidal wave of emerald fire rushing toward us, and in the center of it, I saw a flash of violet. Eric was still fighting, holding the wave back with nothing but sheer arrogant will. Eric! I screamed, the sound lost in the roar of the facility's death throes. I saw him turn, even from 100 yards away, his glowing eyes locked onto mine. He didn't run for the pod. He hit a button on the wall, a manual override that sealed the transport bay doors, locking him on the other side with the monster. No! I slammed my fists against the reinforced door, but it was useless. The pod's computer began a countdown. 5, 4, 3. Through the small observation window in the door, I saw Eric raise a hand. He wasn't saying goodbye. He was pointing at his neck, at the spot where my scent masker lived. 2, 1. The pod didn't just move. It vanished into the vacuum tube with a force that knocked me unconscious. When I opened my eyes, the world was blindingly bright. I was lying in a field of tall grass, the smell of damp earth and morning dew filling my senses. The sun was rising, casting long golden shadows across a landscape I didn't recognize. I sat up, my head spinning. Marcus was nearby, sitting against the pod's wreckage, looking exhausted but alive. In the distance, a massive plume of green smoke was rising from a crater where the Thorne facility used to be. We're out, Marcus whispered. We're 5 miles away. He did it. I stood up, my legs trembling. I reached for my neck, my fingers searching for the scent masker. It was gone. My skin was bare. And for the first time in 3 years, I could smell everything. The grass, the trees, the distant smoke. But there was something else. A faint, flickering scent that shouldn't have been there. It was honey and wildfire. But it wasn't mine. I turned around, my heart stopping in my chest, Standing at the edge of the woods was a man. He was covered in soot, his clothes in rags, and his eyes were no longer violet. They were a clear, piercing amber. But as he stepped into the light, he didn't move like Eric. He didn't smile like Eric. He held up a small, silver object, the scent masker I'd lost in the tunnel. "Petra," the man said, his voice a perfect, haunting echo of Eric's. "The merger is complete, but I'm afraid the Eric you knew didn't survive the transition." He crushed the scent masker in his palm, and a puff of emerald dust drifted into the morning air. Chapter 15. The man standing at the edge of the woods looked like the billionaire I'd fallen for in a broken elevator, but the air around him felt like a localized weather system. The emerald dust from the crushed scent masker didn't fall to the ground. It circled his hand like a miniature nebula. My heart, which had been ready to burst with relief, went stone cold. "Eric?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the rustle of the grass. I took a step toward him, then stopped. The wildfire bond that usually hummed in my mind was no longer a golden thread. It was a roaring furnace, so hot it felt like it was cauterizing my thoughts. The man tilted his head, a movement so fluid and predatory it made my skin crawl. "Eric is a foundation," he said, his voice vibrating with a dual resonance, as if two people were speaking in perfect, haunting unison. "But the fire Silas Thorne created needed a vessel that didn't hide. It needed an alpha who had stopped pretending to be human." He walked toward me, the soot-stained rags of his expensive suit fluttering in the morning breeze. Marcus made a move to stand, but the man simply glanced at him, and Marcus slumped back down, not in pain, but as if the sheer weight of the man's presence had pinned him to the earth. "Stay back," I snapped, my fierce survival instinct finally overriding the shock. I didn't have a weapon, and the mirror sister had already proven that biological doubles were out of my league. But I was still Petra, and I didn't take orders from ghosts or monsters. "I don't care if you're a refined version or a merger. If Eric isn't in there, you're just a very attractive pile of debris." He stopped 3 feet away. The scent hit me then. Not the fermented toxic smell of the emerald eclipse, but something new. It was Eric's scotch and cedar, but it was laced with the smell of a lightning strike. It was clean. It was terrifying. "He is in here, Petra," the man said, his eyes softening into a shade of amber that looked almost human. He reached out, his hand trembling as he reached for my face. "He's the part of me that's terrified of losing you. But the other part, the part that survived the core, it's finally free of the masks." "Prove it," I challenged, leaning into his touch even as I kept my shoulders squared. "Tell me something only the arrogant alpha who got stuck in an elevator with a box of kale would know." A slow, devastatingly familiar smirk touched his lips. It was the Eric smirk, the one that made me want to argue and kiss him at the same time. "I'd tell you that your Rose alias was terrible," he murmured, his voice dropping into a low, intimate rumble. "But mostly I'd tell you that I'd spend another 3 years in the dark just to hear you call me an idiot again." The double voice was gone. It was just Eric. Or at least the version of Eric that had survived a 5-mile blast radius and a biological merger. I let out a breath I'd been holding since the transport pod launched, and I didn't just lean in. I grabbed the lapels of his ruined jacket and pulled him down into a kiss that tasted of victory and survival. "You're an idiot," I whispered against his lips. "And you're A," he replied, pulling me closer until there was no space left for secrets or scent maskers. "Which means our next delivery is going to be a lot more complicated than kale." In the distance, the sun fully cleared the horizon, illuminating the new world we had made. The Thorne records were gone, the facility was a crater, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't hiding. I was standing in the open, smelling of wildfire and honey, next to the man who had burned a mountain down just to find me. The concierge was officially retired. The Luna had arrived. Hello and welcome to Daniella's Romance Library. If you've enjoyed this piece I wrote from my heart, please drop a heart, and where you are joining in from. I love you all. See you in the next story.